You're listening to the God Life Culture podcast, where faith
and what's trending collide. Welcome back to the latest episode of the God Life Culture podcast. This is Eddie.
What's up, everyone? This is Miguel, and we are so thankful that you are tuned in to another episode of the God Life Culture podcast. We are excited to, have another opportunity to speak to you and another opportunity for you all to be blessed by our conversations. We want to remind you to hit that subscribe button so you can be notified whenever we drop a new episode. And don't forget to leave that rating, to leave that review. It helps our podcast be put in front of more people so our audience just continues to grow. We want to say hello to all of our new subscribers and all of our new listeners that are jumping on the podcast, that are catching up to all of our previous episodes. We just want to say thank you for joining us on this journey. Eddie, how are you feeling today?
Today has been a crazy day. For a lot of our listeners, you're very aware that, I have two awesome boys, a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old. It's really a 1-year-old going on 15 and a 4-year-old going on 20.
Yeah.
They're a definite dynamic duo. And days like today where I'm working from home, preparing, I have to preach at the youth service tonight. There's other things going on, had an appointment coming to the house as well. The boys are just jumping off the walls. It's been a crazy day, especially with the little one who, like I said, he's one going on 15 because, he wants to emulate everything his older brother is doing. So if the older brother is doing a cartwheel, he's trying to do a cartwheel. If the older brother's jumping off the couch, acting like he's Spider-Man, he's attempting to roll over the couch to land on a little Spider-Man stand. So it's been a very crazy day. But aside from all of that, as always, I have to be grateful to God for another day of life. Everyone is healthy. Everyone is alive. Everyone's doing well. So all that other stuff is just part of life. How's everything going for you?
Yeah, everything is great. I definitely can relate to that feeling of whenever you have a day where you have something to do that's very important, whether it's something within your church or your job, everything just, everyone decides to act up that day, right? There are distractions, interruptions, a lot of work and different things. So I definitely know that feeling. But like you said, although there is a lot of, craziness and, our schedules are crazy right now, we've said this before, this isn't the only thing that we do. So we are involved in many other things, right? And we also have families and all of that we tend to. So, definitely that feeling of gratitude is something that definitely keeps us in check, right? And whenever you have those days where it seems crazy and it seems like you can't handle it, right? That just that element of gratitude definitely kind of centers you and helps you, remember the reason why you're doing what you're doing. And, it definitely helps you focus a bit. So, all you listeners out there who have those similar feelings and emotions, remember, be grateful, right, for even those tough days, And today, we have a very special guest on our podcast for, I want to say, I guess since we started this podcast, mental health, we've always talked about it.
Yes.
We've had different episodes. I was actually looking back at the season 1 episodes a few days ago, all the way, scrolling through Apple Podcasts all the way to the bottom. And, we have even like our second or third episode, we touch on mental health.
Yes.
We have episodes that ring a bell, like You Don't Have to Drown, right?
Yep.
Where we talked about depression and all of those things. So just a few weeks ago, we had a therapist, right? A systems therapist on the show, Priscilla Berrios. And, many of you guys enjoyed that episode. And we definitely got a great perspective on mental health and therapy and all of those things. And today, we want to continue that conversation. We want to continue that conversation on mental health, its effects, and just, how we can all grow and be better. So we have with us a very special guest that I would like you all to welcome to the God Life Culture podcast, Cedric Hoard. So Cedric, can you please say hello to our listeners?
Yes. Hello. Thank you guys for tuning in. And ultimately, I'm happy to be here on this platform. So thank you for having me.
Awesome. Yeah, we're so glad that you're here because, again, we just want to dive into this topic that, we've noticed and we've discussed before that it seems like now a lot of people are drawing their attention to this topic on mental health. They are, seeking, more information and guidance on this. But, even before we get into that, we always like to give our guests an opportunity to introduce themselves, give us some background on what they do, who they are. So, Cedric, would you just introduce yourself to our listeners? Tell us a little bit about your background, where you're from, what you do, and all that good stuff.
Yes. So once again, my name is Cedric Hoard. I am from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So we have a lot of cold weather here. So yeah, it's still in the 50s, surprisingly. But that's where I come from, born and raised. Just a little bit about me, first and foremost. I am a believer in Jesus Christ, and like to say that is the lens in which I see the world. So I'm really appreciative of just Christ's sacrifice on the cross for me. Um, Apart from that, I am a husband, I'm a therapist, I'm a spoken word artist. And I guess the new thing that will be adding to my life is me and my wife. We are expecting our first child. So
Nice.
Awesome.
yes,
Congrats.
thank you. So that's been a new kind of refreshing, exciting thing in my life, man. So yeah, that's me.
So I hope I didn't scare you off with my stories of my boys.
Man, I was definitely thinking about it. Like, man, that's what's to come, I guess, right?
Yeah, it
So,
definitely is. And you know what? It comes with its moments as a parent. You'll also see, and even now, also, as your wife starts to begin to show, and I don't know how far along she is, that you start to become more careful about things. And then once
yeah,
some kids come out, man, it's like you're always on high alert, and they're
man.
always testing you and your limits, and they're like jumping off the fridge, jumping off the couch, but it's all fun and it's a blessing. And it's also, once that chapter opens up in your life, and like I said, even now you begin to understand a little bit more about God's love for us and all
Yeah,
of that also. So it's definitely a journey worth
yeah,
having.
man.
Now, you did mention that you are a therapist. Now,
hmm
we know that there are different types of therapists, and therapists do different things, and all of these things. So, can you just give us a little more, background as to what exactly you do, and what inspired you or pushed you to want to make this a career, right? To follow this career path.
Yes, that's a great question. So, when I was in grad school, I got my master's in clinical and mental health counseling. So, I'm a mental health therapist. I guess school of thought, therapy wise, I'm considered a CBT therapist, CBT being short for cognitive behavioral therapy. And essentially, what I do is I really help clients, one, become aware of just faulty negative thinkings that have impacted their life. We might see that thinking in terms of symptoms, anxiety, depression symptoms, trauma symptoms, and ultimately giving them the tools, the skills, the perspective in order to challenge those thoughts into more productive, accurate narratives about their life. The thing that really, I guess, got me into mental health, it's just my own journey and my own story. It's
Mm.
this saying that says, in a lot of research, there is me search, meaning that sometimes we get into things simply because we are trying to research and discover things from our own life. So that's very true for me. I'll share briefly. This was really when I was in high school, sophomore year of high school. My best friend, really for my entire life, going all the way back to preschool, actually passed away in his sleep. He had
Well,
a moment of epilepsy in his sleep, and unfortunately passed away. It was a very challenging, difficult time for me. But I really say that during that time, even though it was a tragic situation, that's when God really just began to stir a lot in me. Um, and just I was really in that time, middle school, high school, just really going through my own challenges of depression and low self esteem, insecurity. And really through his death, I was like, wow, I want to be there for people who I wish I had. when I was in that time in my life. So that was really what kind of spurred this passion, really wanted to help people. So going into college, getting a psychology degree, learning more about the counseling profession, that's what really led me down this path. So definitely some personal testimony and personal story in my path.
Those are all, there's this phrase that I think it's slipping my memory, was like, be the person you needed when you were younger, or something like that.
Yeah.
And it is definitely, with a situation like the one that you went through, it's like people react differently to things. There's people that would have, ran away from that, and, be like, I don't want to deal with people. I don't want to help people,
Yeah.
whatever. And then you have the other people who understand and process their grief, and they process that situation differently and decide to take the path that you took, which is, I'm going to be there. I want to be there. I want to be available to help people, go through and process whatever feelings or emotions or events that happen in their life that have marked them. And now they have to process all those feelings and stuff. So, that is very commendable. And I know that, we need a lot more of that as well, especially in today's day and age. And especially from men, having more men be that way as well,
Yeah.
and not closing off. I think that, and it's something that we'll talk about a little later as well, but that, we are stereotyped for men, to, hoard your feelings, just keep
Definitely.
them deep down inside, and then keep it moving.
Yes.
So thank you for making that career choice, because I know that, through that you have been impacting people not only on a therapy level and all of that, but also, spiritually with the way that God uses you in that as well.
Yeah.
Switching gears a little bit, we are in the age of technology and in the age of social media, and regardless of what career path you choose, 9 times out of 10, everybody uses that social media to, throw out there or put out there, their thing. Singers will sing live, musicians will play, artists will post their stuff. And also people in your field as well, they put up posts that and put up videos and reels, whether it's giving out inspirational things or, advice. And recently you posted a Instagram reel where you mentioned 3 things to remember when seeking therapy. And for each one of the things that you posted, I would like for you to expand a little bit on each one of those. So the first thing on your list was, a diagnosis explains you, yet it doesn't define you. What did you mean by that?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, a diagnosis, it only explains you, it doesn't define you. It is simply an explanation of the symptoms that you are experiencing, but that is not the totality of who you are as a person. Me being a believer, I have to go back really to the first part of scripture, where in Genesis it says that we were created in God's image.
Yes.
And being image bearers, that simply means for me that everyone was made with dignity and value and worth. That is really, I think, the core of where our identity starts. Now, obviously, as a believer, my hope is that people would move from being an image bearer to now have a relationship with Christ. But I think first and foremost, that's where it starts. Diagnosis, again, it is an explanation. We can look at these explanations to give us context to our situation and why we may respond the way we respond, why we may think the way that we think. But at the end of the day, that is not the totality of who you are. That is not the definition of you as a person. It's kind of the saying that I really adopted as well, just in my practice and work with people. I really treat people, not diagnosis, right? Considering the whole person and not just seeing them for their specific disorder or diagnosis.
Yeah, and I think that's very important, because there are people who, they take on their diagnosis, whether, they've been diagnosed with depression or anxiety or, whatever, being bipolar, and all of a sudden that's all they are. That's their only a depressed person. They're only someone who's always anxious. And understanding that's only part of the situation, but it's not you, and your identity as a totality is very important. The
Yeah.
second thing you posted, the second point on this post was your therapist is a clinician, not a magician. Talk to
Yeah.
us a little about that.
Yeah, man. We don't, as therapists, as much as we want to, we don't have a magic wand. We can't make things magically disappear. So, our job is to guide, our job is to educate, and give the right perspective, have the right knowledge. But the client also has a role to play in this as well. So, we as clinicians, we as therapists, counselors, social workers, you name it, we can simply give our clients tools, but it is up for the client to actually utilize those tools. So as much as we want to, man, we aren't magicians. We can't change certain circumstances. We can't magically make people better, but by giving people the tools necessary and clients using those tools, that is hopefully a way to change and healing.
Yep. And the third part you put was progress always involves process.
Yeah, can't separate those two, man. Process is hard. I know for me, I don't like processes. But processes are the things that lead to true progress. We can't separate those two things. So if we want to grow in this life, if we want to progress in this life, we sometimes have to go through uncomfortable processes in order for us to get there.
Yeah, and I think that's part of understanding also why your clinician is not a magician, because you do have to put work into it. And as you put in the work and you put in the exercises or whatever are the tips that are given to you in order to help you depending on your certain circumstance or situation, little by little, if they are effective, if the regimen or whatever is given to you is effective, you will see progress. But it is going to take time. It's going to take some tweaking. I think that sometimes there are certain things that may be suggested that don't always work, but it doesn't mean, okay, that's it, I'm gonna give up. It just means, okay, that specifically didn't work, so then let's try something different.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think another hot topic, right, that especially within the church, I think it affects everyone, but within the church, I think we oftentimes have this strict thought or perspective on, and it's the idea of medication. And sometimes when it comes to medication, it almost seems like, well, if you've received medication for some of these things, then you lack the faith and you lack, the belief that God can help you and change you. And, instead of receiving medication, you should just be praying and seeking the Lord and doing these things. And, you have a reel that you also posted on Instagram where you say that medication will keep you afloat, but you will still have to learn how to swim. And you went on to say pills without skills will not change the way you feel.
Yeah.
So, in reading all of that and listening to that, and in your experience, do you find that people are quick to want medication to treat their situation as opposed to making changes in their life and in their lifestyle, things like sleep, diet, and exercise? Do you think that people just kind of, want the medication and find that it's easier to go that route?
I do. I think so. I think for some people, see medication as a quick way out. Medication certainly has its place. I do think it is effective. But I think I also said, kind of in that video, medication needs teammates. It needs other things, right? So we could give people pills, but we need to give them skills as well. Medication will not help people make better choices in their life. Medication will not give people the skills necessary to build positive relationships or set boundaries in their life. So you definitely need more than just medication. And I do think, not getting too much into kind of the pharmaceutical thing and money thing, but I definitely think that plays into it as well. Sometimes medication is pushed because sometimes it is a money thing.
Yeah.
But really for my clients, I want to give them, again, the full, complete picture, kind of this idea of holistic health. So for me, and just in my credentialing, I can't prescribe medication. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a psychiatrist. I can offer medication, but really my job and my role is to help people make those lifestyle changes, like you were saying. So, how is your sleep? How is your diet? Right? How are you able to challenge some of your negative thinking? Right? What are you doing for self care? How are you tending to yourself? What are your relationships like? Right? So really treating the holistic person, I think is really a good way to go.
And I think it is important to point those things out, because many a times we don't realize, because we're in the thick of things, or we're in our own process, our own situation, or whatever, don't realize that our lifestyle choices are not helping or making our situation even worse.
Hmm.
And one of the things too that we see a lot, that happens career wise and also within the church, within leadership, as well, is the idea of people getting burned out.
Yeah.
And in February, you posted, burnout happens when your projects become your identity.
Hmm.
And, I was curious, as, someone who, observes people and sees, and has people come in or whatever, what does that look like from the outside looking in? When you're looking at someone who you say, that phrase goes directly with them, burnout happens when your projects become your identity. What does that look like from the outside looking in?
Yeah, I think what that means in kind of my frame of mind when I posted that, it was honestly a personal thing for me. I think sometimes, especially in this society and even social media, we, if we're not careful, we can um, view our worth based on how productive we are, or how much we're posting, or how much we're doing. Right. I really got that idea from author pastor Peter Scazzaro. Has an amazing book called Emotionally Healthy Spirituality. But really, the premise of this book is getting us to realize that more than we are human doings, we are human beings, right?
Mm.
So sometimes burnout can happen when we start finding our identity in the projects or the things that we are doing. And I even think that can result in ministry. There's nothing wrong with ministry and doing God's work. But if we start finding that as the source of our identity more than God being the source, I think that's when burnout can definitely happen. So it's this idea of having a balance, knowing that at the end of the day, we are human beings, not human doings. And sometimes we just need to be and rest, instead of constantly grinding and making moves, right? We hear all of this in our culture today, but just getting back to just being restful, being still.
Yeah, and I think we throw out this term a lot. We say burnout, right? And we're so used to hearing it and saying it. What does it actually look like, right? So when we've reached a point where we're burnt out, right? Or
Mhm.
or we say that, oh, they've burned out, they've experienced burnout. What does that mean? What does that look like?
Yes, your mood's impacted, so you might be more irritable with people. You might be snappy. Your concentration is impacted, so you have poor concentration. Um, physically, you might feel tired and lethargic. Just don't have any energy for anything. You'll avoid responsibilities, avoid people. You will procrastinate. Burnout is just this feeling of just dread, and I just can't take anything on anymore. So I think it really impacts us not only on a psychological level but the physical level as well. We might feel restless, or to the contrary, we might just be so tired, where again we just kind of avoid everything and everybody.
Thinking about, when we speak about like the description of burnout, what does that look like? What does that feel like? And looking at it from the lens of, something I mentioned in the beginning of the episode in the conversation where you were sharing, what had happened to you when you were younger in high school. And I had made the thing that sometimes as men, we are expected or stereotyped to, bottle up those feelings, don't talk
Hmm.
about it, just keep it to yourself. And we can also see a lot that burnout may happen a lot to men as well, because they don't have a circle, they don't have the comfortability with sharing with people,
Yeah.
certain situations, whether or not they're struggling, whether or not they need help, whether or not they just want more to be able to just like have a sounding board to like
Yes.
bounce things off of, as well. And that brings to mind the idea of like toxic masculinity.
Yeah.
And I wonder, and I ask you the question, whether or not first of all, what does toxic masculinity means,
Hmm.
and does that look different in 2021 than they did maybe in 1991?
That's interesting. Yes. Well, first, the definition. That is not to say that masculinity in it of itself is toxic. Like we're
Mhm.
not we're not toxic just because we're men. That is to say that there are sometimes unhelpful messages and beliefs that we as men have adopted into our life. So, men, we can't show emotions, or we always have to be strong or tough, or if we do show emotions, that is a sign of being feminine. Or even more extreme things, being a man is defined by how many girls you can get, or money, material things, wealth,
Mhm.
prestige, right? So it's not to say that masculinity of itself is toxic, but the messages and beliefs that sometimes we as men get and adopt, that can be toxic. I think that's really an interesting question that you pose. Like, does toxic masculinity look different now than it did a few years ago? I would say yes. I think just because I think nowadays in our society, it just like us having a conversation right now, like the fact that we're able to get to this point, I feel like is very different than a few years ago, or maybe we think about our parents and grandparents, like getting to this point to even be able to talk about this in such an open, vulnerable, and candid way, I think is a difference, and I think is a change. So yeah, the term toxic masculinity is fairly new in society, but I think we as men, we are starting to break away from some of these messages, which I think is such a good sign moving forward.
And I think that's great, especially like you said, having these conversations because, if we want things to change and if we want perspectives to change, right, it really does start with us. I myself, I see this, sometimes all the time, as a teacher, a high school teacher being shaped, in the minds of these, guys who are in school and growing up and going through the emotions and going through, just that stage of growing up
Mm,
where society really dictates and puts in their face what a man is,
mm,
and you see the guys that feel like they have to be the most dominant
yeah.
and the strongest, and they act out in that way. And then you have those that aren't the strongest and may consider themselves weak, and you see
Hmm.
how they have that low self-esteem and insecurity. you
Definitely.
know um as a therapist, have you ever found yourself, therapist, or just as a believer, right, and an adult, and a person of influence, have you ever found yourself, speaking to someone who had these kind of issues of feeling that low self-esteem or insecurity that kind of came from their adolescence or childhood?
Yes, yes, yes. So, um, my primary population is men, and it is adolescents and kind of young adults. So I definitely see this, especially with men, of, I would say, these seeds being planted. And what I mean by that, these seeds that tell them that they're not man enough. So they either feel this sense of inadequacy or this sense of rejection in their life. And as we've been talking about with the toxic masculinity, instead of addressing that or acknowledging that, sometimes we as men were encouraged to hide that and run away from that. So you'll see men who, married men who might have fallen into infidelity, simply because of these messages of inadequacy coming up. I think of one specific client in general. Good man of God. One of the circumstances in his life is that he lost his job, was married, a few children, and he had this message of, men are supposed to provide. So going back to kind of the whole identity piece, him finding his identity in his work, and that was really something he valued. The moment he lost his job, now those thoughts and those messages are targeting his identity, right? I'm not man enough. I'm not good enough. I'm inadequate. So unfortunately, that kind of had led him down this path of just infidelities, of just trying to feel good enough, by unfortunately running away from responsibilities and running to other women and other things just to kind of feel this void that he was feeling. So yeah, man, I definitely see it a lot. And I'll say this real quick. There's always a why to someone's what. The what is the behaviors that we see, the behaviors that we noticed. The why is simply the context behind the behaviors. So the why doesn't, excuse what someone's doing. It just gives us an understanding to what's underneath and what drives people's behaviors, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think oftentimes we see the what, right? We see the behavior first, and we see kind of how it's expressed, and we really don't know the whys,
Yeah,
right? When we look
yeah,
at other people until you really have the conversation or get to know someone, or kind of get into that mindset where you're interested in knowing, why is this person acting in this way, or why every time I mention this, this is like your response, or this is how you act, right? And I think that's very good, for us, and for our listeners to really understand, that statement that we always say, like, you really don't know what other people are going through. You know what I mean? You may see the behavior, you may see how they act out, but you really don't know what's underneath.
yeah.
One of the things that has also, because you speak about, for example, that gentleman, his situation was losing his job. There's been a lot of stuff
Mm-hmm.
happening, especially recently. And, we have seen an increase in the political unrest. We have seen an increase on racial tensions,
Mm-hmm.
especially in the last couple of years as well, especially with technology and, us being able to see things that were being hidden and, swept under the rug. My question to you is, how have you seen, you're out in the fields, or you're with the young people, you're with these young men and older men as well, how has this affected, especially, specifically speaking about like our Black and Latino men,
Mm-hmm.
all this increase in political unrest and racial tensions, how has it affected their mental health?
Yeah, I've seen a lot more anxiety. There's a specific client that I see now, um, who was merely riding his bike, and he actually got hit by a car. Thankfully, nothing tragic happened, but he was so fearful of
Mm-hmm.
getting help because the police arrived, and he was thinking that the police would automatically think that he was at fault.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, here you have an example of a young man that didn't do anything wrong in that situation, but because of the things that he's seen, the things that he's hearing, he has this anxiety of, I can't go to the police for help, right? So I definitely seen it. I mean, even for me personally, being an African American male, um, those times where you see police cars come behind you, and I literally feel that tension in my chest. I feel
Mm-hmm.
that tightness in my chest. And in that moment, I have to take deep breaths, right? I have to get out of that mode, out of that anxiety. Um, and, for some of us, it is valid. It is valid based on the things that we've seen. But I think because we're constantly being fed with this political unrest, this racial unrest, it does have a tremendous and profound impact on us if we're not careful. So
Mm-hmm.
even for me, I have to remind myself, we can be concerned about what's happening in society, but we have to make sure we're not consumed by what's happening in society. So, man, taking a step back sometimes just from media and social media and news, it is definitely helpful for our mental health.
Yeah, definitely. And it is important to have those breaks and those moments of just stepping away and putting your phone down or just shutting off the TV. And it's not you can't consider it to be insensitive or that
Hmm.
that's messed up or that's rude that you're not staying, with your finger on the pulse of what's happening. No, is
Yeah,
it sometimes you need to disconnect for your own well-being and for your own mental health as
definitely.
well, because we also don't want to create a state of mental paranoia
Yeah,
where we're not able to function the way that we're supposed to function because all we are taking in and all we are consuming is all the negative that is happening around the world.
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, and again, the goal of us having these conversations, and speaking about mental health is for us to get better, for us to grow. And if we feel like we need to, seek therapy, right? Or if we feel like we may be feeling some of these things, that we, make the right decisions and do what we need to do to grow.
Hmm.
And like you said, earlier, you stated, and even on social media, you made an announcement a few weeks ago that you and your wife are expecting, right? And
Yes, yes, yes.
how can a man, right, or how can the men that are listening work on their mental health in preparation for starting a family, right? I think we often prepare for every stage in our life, right? Whether it's in schooling, whether it's in marriage, we sometimes may go to marriage counseling before we get married, right? And in starting a family, how can one kind of work on their mental health to get them ready for that new chapter?
It's a great question, man. That's still something I'm still figuring out. I have a tendency to fast forward life, so I'm already thinking about the child being a teenager and how I'm going to handle that. So yeah, I think I'm missing, some key milestones. But yeah, I think that's a great question. I actually posted something literally probably an hour ago. Something to the effect, it was this picture, basically saying that instead of saying that mental illness runs in the family, just recognizing that as trauma running in the family, and we have the ability to stop certain patterns from happening. And I thought that was such a good and different way of looking at it. Almost this idea of, hey, we do have some control in changing the trajectory of what happens in our family. We hear things like, generational cycles, generational curses. We have the ability to stop those things. So I think I kind of answer this two ways. Personally, for me, um, coming from traditional family scenarios where men don't always open up or are encouraged to, I think for me as a father, I really want to be able to model to my child of what that looks like to share and express your emotions in healthy ways, to tell them that vulnerability is actually courage. Vulnerability is not a weakness thing, but it's actually a sign of strength. So I think for me, that's the biggest thing. I think for those listening or those preparing, um, being aware of, I'll go back to the inadequacy thing, being aware of the things that make you feel inadequate, especially as a husband or a married or a husband or a soon to be father, that can produce a lot of inadequacy.
Hmm.
Do I know what I'm doing? Right? Am I a good enough husband? Can I provide? Can I lead my children? Right? Being aware of those vulnerabilities and insecurities that you have, instead of running from them, beginning to embrace them, beginning to acknowledge them. It is simply okay to be like, even in prayer, like, man, God, this is a new chapter in my life. And I don't really know what it looks like or what I'm doing. But give me the courage, give me the perspective to be able to handle that effectively.
Yeah.
So I think that that would be it for me. Recognizing your inadequacies, but instead of running from them, in a way, embracing them and acknowledging them.
Yeah, absolutely. That reminds me of how I felt in that beginning stage of when, we found out my wife was pregnant with our firstborn, and the feeling of, I have no idea what I'm doing.
Right. Yeah.
And the feeling of, and then, especially for men who are in my position as well, who grew up without positive male role models or a father figure and all that other stuff as well, you start to notice that void, that quote unquote void, in which you're like, man, what am I supposed to do? No one taught me, no one showed me, or whatever.
Hmm.
And I think it's true. You have to be like, you know what? That is something that I lacked. Definitely pray about it and present it to God as well. But also be like, you know what? I may not have had that. And that's okay. But I'm going to make sure to whatever it was that I felt like I was lacking to bring forth and to pull out of myself, to bring to my children as well, because it is possible, you can't just sit on the fact that, I'm inadequate or I didn't have it. That's it. No, you can. And that's where the grace of God and God's love and his mercy and his greatness comes through, where you may not have had that. No one taught it to you, but through God deposits that in you, and you're able to deposit that into your children moving forward as well. And, the generational curses and all that other stuff as well, that's also very important too, because those are things that through Christ, we are able to cancel out. Through Christ,
Yeah.
we're able to be like, you know what, that may have gone through all my uncles, or I may have gone through all the aunts in the family,
Yeah.
but through us, it will not. It's not going to enter. Being also prayerful about it, but also vigilant and understanding, what were certain mistakes that maybe happened,
Yeah.
in their upbringing that cultivated that within them, to be like, you know what, that's not the route we're going to take.
Amen. Amen.
You said earlier in the episode that you also do spoken word. And I have seen a lot of your videos. I myself, have been doing spoken word for a few years now. I have albums out. And one of the things that I know for me, this became an outlet, and this became a way for me to really, process certain emotions and process certain feelings. And, whether it was a prayer, whether it was a conversation, the different styles of each poem at the time. And, I know for me, I know what that did and how that helped me.
Yeah.
So my question for you is, when it comes to your spoken word and the things that you release and put out, how has it helped you process emotions and feelings, whether it was, just things that in the practical, really real, like earthly realm, right? Just everyday emotions and feelings, and also kind of in the spiritual realm, right? The conversations with God and those prayers, that you lift up to him. How has your spoken word kind of bettered your mental health and helped you process all of these things?
It's a great question, man. I think for me, growing up, just in church circles, especially when you're younger, a few years ago, you didn't see a whole lot of spoken word or ministry being expressed in that way. It was a lot of the singing, it was a lot of the dancing. But for me and my temperament, especially growing up in church, I was like, man, Lord, what is my gift? I don't have anything, right? So I think for me, God really used poetry, writing, spoken word to really boost my confidence. But it really became a way, as you were saying, of just being able to connect to the Father in such a deep way. I'll share a little bit of this. So I didn't necessarily just start off writing, when I was younger. I didn't really start writing and doing spoken word until college. It was open mic nights at college, and I would attend, and kind of during that time, kind of simultaneously, I ran across YouTube videos of Passion for Christ movement, and seeing the poets there, and it really sparked this interest for me. Like, man, I would love to be able to do that and just express not only myself, but just express God's love to people in such a creative way. So that was really kind of the spark plug for me. And it really started out as a ministry opportunity, but like I said, it did tremendously boost my confidence. I was able to therapeutically let go and get off certain things that were on my mind, certain things that I was carrying on me. So I definitely agree with what you were saying, and how it's been helpful for you. I think writing, creativity, It does such an impact on our brains. It activates certain things in our brains that promote better health for us. So I think writing in general, or creativity in general, has tremendous ways of bettering our mental health. So yeah, definitely, man.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, man. And something that you also said that we could highlight is the fact that, whether you're growing up in the church or just, around believers, sometimes you will feel those feelings where you really don't know what your gift is. You don't know what your lane is. You see, people that are pastors or preachers or, teachers, and you're like, God, I can't do any of those things, or that's not me. That's not who I am. But there's always something that God has for you, right? There is always a lane that he has prepared for you, a path that he has for you that you can do. And there could be so many other people doing that same thing, but God has given you the grace to do it in your own unique way. And you bring something different to the table. And I think that's something definitely worth highlighting, that oftentimes we just may feel like, there's no room for us, right? Because maybe there's so many other people who do the same thing, or are doing these different things that we just can't see ourselves doing. So I love that you said that. And to our listeners, definitely remember that there is room for you. Your gift will also make room for you. And I think that, all of these gifts and talents and abilities that God has given us, it is to make us better, to make our lives better, to make our connection with him stronger. And in that process, I believe our mental health, is one of those things that our Savior, our Lord, definitely wants us to work on, and definitely wants us to get stronger in that area. Amen. So Cedric, we just want to thank you for coming on here, for, being open with us, being transparent with us. I would like for you to just give out your socials, where people can find you, and where they can follow you.
Yes, thank you for having me, guys. I really enjoyed this time. I don't take it for granted or lightly, so thank you, guys. For those that are listening, you can follow me on Instagram. It is just my full name, Cedric Dale Hoard. So Cedric, middle name Dale, last name Hoard, Cedric Dale Hoard. Just one kind of thing all together. You can find me there. Also have Facebook as well, also my full name. And you can check me out on YouTube. Also, just type in my full name as well if you want to see more spoken word videos, things like that. So, yeah, definitely connect with me. And yeah, that's where you can find me.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Cedric, once again. And for all of our listeners, definitely go and find him on social media. Follow him. He has great videos, great content. Check out his spoken word as well. It's all there. And, definitely we just want to thank you for coming on here. And we know that all the things that you shared in this conversation definitely impacted our listeners. So thank you.
Awesome, man. Thank you.
Yes, and definitely all of you who are listening, like I said, go and follow him on his social media. And also be sure to follow our podcast at God Life Culture Podcast on Facebook and on Instagram. We drop our episodes every Monday, so be sure to hit that subscribe button so you can be notified when we drop a new episode.
So once again, Cedric, thank you for joining us, having this conversation with us. To our listeners, be sure to find him on all his social media platforms, his website, Cedric Dale Hoard. Google him, he will pop up, and you can follow him from there. So we want to thank you guys for taking your time to listen to the latest episode of the God Life Culture podcast. That's God Life Culture. Until next time.
See ya.
Bye.